We looked at the importance, and we said globalization is the interconnectedness of nations, countries, generally the world. And we said the world has so become globalized, so become connected, such that we are neatly together. We depend on each other, to carry out our activities or to carry out one thing or other. So today, we've also proceeded to look at the advantages, or let's say the merits, the goods that come out of globalization. Things such as trade, we looked at economics, we looked at commerce, because a country or a nation can produce and have the opportunity to export, have the opportunity to reach out to other new markets, have the opportunity to reach out to other countries or nations that may not have what they produce or have what they have. Okay, we examined that yesterday. We also looked at how countries can benefit from each other in terms of security and all of that, technology. After that, we also looked at the challenges. We say one of the challenges is, urbanization, population explosion, where people are migrating so much to the urban areas for bigger opportunities, better opportunities, which is bringing about globalization. And on the other hand, also it has some security challenges that comes along with it, poverty, because of the scrounge for resources and all of that. So we examined all of that globalization. We also looked at other aspects like climate change that affects globally and weather, from which we wrapped up the classes today. I'm going to be building on that this morning. Or today rather. So I welcome us. Today we're going to be looking at terrorism. This is quite a broad topic. But as you can see my slide, I'm going to be doing more of summary, yes, because we only have few contacts for this class and we may not be able to do a detailed work because of the short time we have. So for that reason, I'm going to be doing more summary. Look at contemporary forms of terrorism. We'll look at political psychology that drives terrorism. For half time, we'll look at climate change and all of that. So which is all still part of the course, which is contemporary and global studies. So terrorism comes out of the word terror. It is built from the word terror. And what does it mean? The word terror means to put fear. Somebody, to put fear in people with the aim of dominating, with the aim of gaining advantage, or with the aim of attempting to carry out several acts. And these things have taken a new turn in our day-to-day. Previously, in the wake of understanding terrorism, it was majorly used by groups to achieve basic goals of what they wanted. So it's like what we have when teenagers are growing up, some experience bullying, which is not in any case good. And bullying tries to put in fear. When somebody puts fear in another person, and because of that fear, it causes the other person to have upper hand and control. Okay, but which of course in any case is bad, but in a larger scale and in a more deeper sense of it, terrorism is more than what it just is about just putting fear, because terrorism is driven by ideologies. Terrorism is driven by beliefs. Terrorism is driven by people's or a group's plan to achieve certain goals. So we will not just look at terrorism for how it came. We're also looking at the modern forms of terrorism, because terrorism is not just even bombing or as we know it, but it's even beyond that. So we're going to be examining all of that. We said terrorism is predominantly to use by groups to achieve their goal, and it has been on the increase in recent time, and has not limited to regional or territorial conflict, but often relates to cultural and religious differences among people. So, as widely defined in post-political discourse, now you must understand that many definitions have evolved over time about terrorism and the concept of this concept, but I will just be picking a few here and there because we may not be able to exhaustively examine all of these definitions of terrorism that has evolved over time. So we said the word terror first appeared in the reign of terror during French Revolution, according to Alda, and terrorism dates back to the first century. Okay, there was a period where religious sanctuaries were dying in the service of God, dying while killing the assumed enemies of God. So it is important to note that the history of terrorism cannot be complete without stating the genesis of modern day suicide bombing in our world. Okay, well, terrorism started as an act of putting fear where people wanted to gain advantage and dominance, and they did that. But in our today's world, we see that terrorism has taken a new turn. Yes, even as far as bombing, and you see certain groups and terrorist groups taking ownership of that responsibility. Yes, the modern day issues in terrorism has evolved. So terrorism means different things to different people at different times. Okay. Richards, 2014, he has submitted that terrorism is a method of combat in which random or symbolic victims become targets of violence. Terrorism is a means to an end, a technique that is used by terrorists to achieve a calculated objective by applying a wide variety of deliberately violent means and methods that specify goal. Furthermore, which conventional warfare takes to conquer the enemy, terrorism merely seeks to manipulate political change through terror. So, Newman and Smith says terrorism is only an act. It's only a political act, or a political, is a goal that has a political undertone. It's an action that the predominant or primary goal of it is what? Is political. Okay, these are different forms of beliefs about ideology. Now let's look at this. It is in practice that is known to conceptualize terrorism within regional blocks. The AU, the European Union, the United Nations, the Arab Convention, among others. Terrorism within the African Union context, although the AU need not mention a list of terrorist organizations in Africa, this convention on the prevention and combating of terrorism defines terrorism as any act which is a violation of criminal laws of a state party. Any violation of the criminal laws of a state party which may endanger lives, physical integrity, or freedom or cause of injury or death to any person, number of personal groups, and causes may damage public or private property, natural resources, environmental calculated heritage, and it's intended to intimidate, put fear, coerce, induce government, bodies, or institutions, and general public or any segment thereof to do or abstain from doing any act or adopt or abandon a particular standpoint or act according to certain principles. This is in Article 2 of the African Union Pact. So what we are, you see, this definition now captures all terrorism is all about. It first of all starts by telling us that it's an act that violates law, okay, and it puts physical life, property, freedom, even natural resources, environmental, cultural, it puts all of them in danger. Then not only that, it also aims to intimidate, put fear, coerce people, government, institutions to act against their will is very wide, and the goal of it is not good in any sense. It's only an act for a few persons to achieve their goal and objective and what they want to achieve. Okay, so as we begin wrapping up on the definition, I believe it is clearly understood the concept of terror and terrorism, as we know it, and as I've explained. And in summary, also understand that terrorism is the act for the destruction of public service or delivery of any essential service to the public, to create public emergency and to create general insurrection in a state. Terrorism has become a picture of the national life. The phenomenon has been variously described as tragic, a crime, and a holy duty. The justified reaction to oppression and an inexcusable abomination. So, strategy of most terrorists is to commit acts of violence that draws attention of the public and local public government and the world to their cause or what they want to achieve. They plan their attack to abstain the greatest, to obtain and the greatest publicity, choosing targets that symbolize what they oppose and their aim to imbibe the culture of fear and intimidation of people. So this is a comprehensive definition and explanation of what terrorism is. Okay, so let us look at what the UN Security Council defined terrorism as. The UN Security Council, under the Resolution 1566 in the year 2004, defines terrorism as criminal acts including against civilians committed with the intent to cause death or serious bodily injury, or taking hostage with the purpose to provoke a state of terror in the general public or a group of persons or particular persons, intimidate a population or compel a government or national organization to do or abstain from doing any act. So this is United Nations Security Council definition of the word terrorism and how it operates. So even Kofi Annan, who was former United Nations Secretary General, a great leader from Ghana, also all have been involved in the fight of terror. Okay, and their proposal also moved on. So as I said, we will not be able to go into the details, but let us look at several things that deduce from it, because we may not have the time to tell all of what we are discussing. Okay, so let's quickly proceed and look at I've explained all of this. I'll go pulling my slide. So let us look at contemporary forms of terrorism. Contemporary forms of terrorism. Now, globally, terrorist organizations try as much as possible to seek attention through the use of acts of violence, fear, intimidation, and coercion, mostly directed towards unarmed civilians, and in some cases military formations as well as state infrastructure, in order to instill fear and apprehension on the general public. So this is the plan, the goal of terrorists, as we have seen over and over. But we need to understand that terrorism is classified into various categories. Yes, if we must understand terrorism, how it works, then it's good to segment it into different categories in order to study it, understand how it works, then effectively know how to deal with it. So we have political terrorism. Looking at the forms of terrorism, we have political terrorism, we have caste terrorism, we have state state-sponsored terrorism, we have limited political terrorism, and we have extreme violence. Okay, if you want to take that down, and we're going to examine them one at a time. So the first one is political terrorism. Now, political terrorism can be seen as the violent criminal behavior premeditated principally to generate terror, fear, coercion, intimidation, as well as harassment within a state in order to gain political recognition. So the goal in political terrorism is politics. Gain recognition, be seen, be known, be heard, and gain political power, political growth. So political terrorism can be any violent criminal behavior that is premeditated, planned, and executed with the goal to generate fear, generate terror, so that they can coerce. What does it mean to coerce? To manipulate, to forcefully make things work in your favor. Okay, and also to intimidate. And all of these things is done within a particular location. It can be states, it can be nations, it can be worldwide, nationally. And the primary or principal goal is to gain political recognition so that attention to be given politically or certain political goals can be achieved. That is number one. Then we also have passive terrorism. Now, passive terrorism, some other places are passive, but passive terrorism can be categorized as activities that are similar in form and method to genuine terrorism, but which nevertheless lack its essential ingredient. It is not the main purpose. It is not the main purpose of a passive terrorist to induce fear in the immediate victim, as in the case of genuine terrorism. But passive terrorism uses modalities and techniques of the genuine terrorists and produces similar consequences or reaction. For instance, the fleeing felon who takes hostage in a passive terrorist, whose methods are similar to those of genuine terrorists, but whose purpose are quite different. So there are persons who or groups that they want some form of attention, or they want something to be seen or something to be looked at. And in that case, they may carry out an act that looks like terrorism, which is a form of terrorism, but their goal is not that. For instance, if a couple of persons want maybe a kind of attention on something to be given, to be listened to, or to be heard, and they kidnap maybe some persons, not with the goal of killing or putting pain, or just to draw the headlines to them that 7 victims were kidnapped. They may tell these victims that you are not here to put pain, you are not here to inflict, you are not here to take the money. You just want that attention because you are taking your own stage, and at the end they may be released to be unharmed. So gas terrorism, the goal is not about the act, it's just a form of attention or recognition over what they may want or to be seen or heard. But I beg your pardon, but they may not, the goal may not necessarily be what a genuine terrorist may do, like put fear or kill, and so that's what we call passive terrorism. Then we have state-sponsored terrorism. These are nations whose rule is based on terror, fear, coercion, intimidation, and oppression of citizens. There are several examples of that across the world. Like, for instance, during the military era of Nigeria, like Sani Abacha, he ruled with a form of terror. Yes, that's state-sponsored terrorism. People like Saddam Hussein, that people feared very because of what the constitution and power and military gives him the power to do. We have people like Idi Amin, late Idi Amin of Uganda. You know, these people, they ruled with a form of terror in the land, and people fear them so much. We call this state-sponsored terrorism. Then we have limited political terrorism. Okay, genuine political terrorism, according to several scholars, is categorized by a revolutionary approach, while limited political terrorism refers to acts of terror which are committed for ideological or political motives, but which are not part of a concerted campaign to capture control of the state. So, in the first one, when we deal with political terrorism, we look at that in the light of taking political control or political dominance. But in limited political terrorism, the goal is not to capture maybe the state or the nation, as the case may be. The case is for probably ideological moves or political moves, want to bring attention for certain things to be done, probably on their behalf. You know, for instance, like what is happening in Bonny land, where the people are fighting, you know, and may look like they are terrorists, but no, they are just fighting for their cause. They are not fighting to gain power. I'm talking about like what's happening in Nigeria Delta in Nigeria. It's not their acts are not meant to seize control over the state or the nation. Their acts of terrorism in quote is only aimed at drawing attention so that something can be done at their plight. They can get better life, better education, better health, clean up of their oil. So those actions are not necessarily aimed to capture or control the state. We call that limited political terrorism, but it is actually the political arena that has to look into that aspect and something to be done about it. Then we have extreme violence. This can be seen as a form of selective or communal form of violence aimed at interfering with peace, security, and tranquility of the state. This is extreme, yes, where people can kill, bombs can be done, and they literally become a nightmare to the general populace. We call that situation, that scenario of such extreme violence. We call it extreme violence. Okay, so we have looked at what we call the various forms of terrorism. We looked at political terrorism, I explained that. We looked at caste terrorism, we looked at state-sponsored terrorism, we also looked at limited political terrorism, and we looked at extreme violence. So all of these are different forms of So all of these are different forms of terrorism, and we're going to be proceeding to look at aspects of terrorism. Terrorism is subdivided into several aspects, of which range from conventional ones to non-conventional aspects. We're going to look at numerous, aspects of terrorism, so that we can, of course, further or better understand terrorism. So we've looked at what I want to call the forms or the types of terrorism, but now I want to look at the various aspects of terrorism. What can be used as a tool for terrorism? What can be used as a tool for terrorism? Now, the first one is what we call chemical terrorism. We look at chemical terrorism, we look at bioterrorism, we look at radiological terrorism, we look at nuclear weapons attack, cyber terrorism. So the first one is chemical terrorism. Now, chemical terrorism is one of the deadliest aspects of terrorism. In a related development, chemical terrorism can be defined as intentionally the use of chemical weapons on innocent civilians for occupation, by a terrorist group. This can be defined as an unwanted presence of chemical substance in or in an environment. In other words, chemoterrorism can be seen as the use of castor beans on the populace. Not the use of gas poison, such as racing on the populace. Furthermore, chemoterrorism involves the application of chemical agents like poisonous gases, liquids, or solids that may have very toxic effect on targeted persons and the ecosystem, as we have experienced within the Syrian war, where the Syrian government made use of nerve agents and chlorine munitions, against civilians. Also in Iran war, where the Iraqi forces utilized organophosphate neurotoxins against several people. So, looking at the different or various aspects of terrorism, or what is used as a tool for terrorism, is what we are looking for. Now, we said we have chemical terrorism, and this is using chemical weapons. Yeah, this is the use of chemical weapons. I will give examples of Syria, Iraq, Iran war, where the use of organophosphate, which are nitrotoxins against people. Generally said, people that live and work in factories that produce chemicals, work in laboratories, are already at risk. Already at risk to hurt and harm. Talk more of a situation where people are now, the terrorist group are now using, chemicals and agent chemicals to attack people, which is very unacceptable because of the long-term effect. Now, one of the things we are dealing with all of this substance terrorism is that it does not really affect the physical body. It goes along to affect internal organs, causes gene mutations, causes deformities, and it's more like, some of it is more like a slow poison. So the effects are very far reaching. Okay, so chemical terrorism, then bioterrorism can be this is a premeditated release of biological viruses, bacteria, fungi, and toxins that can cause several injuries or death to people. When biological agents find their way in the hand of terrorists, it will pose serious threats for state as well as other security architecture. This is because biological agents can easily be spread through water, food, among others. A good example of bioterrorism is when, Shinokuro religious group released anthrax in Tokyo in 1993. So, biological terrorism or terrorism, just like chemical terrorism, chemical uses chemical. So, this is biological means where you can poison water, poison the air, and there is all over it becomes airborne problem. Now, any infection that is air related is not even dangerous because COVID, for instance, one of the things that made the spread of COVID very easy is not really just because of the touch, but also because of air, in the environment. Everyone has to wear nose masks and all of that because it's very dangerous. You can't use the same thing you can't touch the same thing that people who are already infected touch and all of that. So we call it bioterrorism. Very dangerous form of terrorism. If you wanted to use that, everybody can be easily affected within a short period of time. So we call it bioterrorism. Then we have radiological terrorism. Radiological terrorism is another aspect of terrorism, which involves an act of dispersing radiological devices with the aim of causing political panic or attacking nuclear facilities and an attempt to undermine the security. There is no doubt that radiological terrorism can pose very high risks to anyone, though its usage to attack nuclear facilities has been reportedly very few. Nevertheless, There's been increased anxiety and palpable fear among world population about the huge threat that such attacks may cause to global peace and security. So, radiological, this radiological is now going to gases. The radiological substances are very dangerous, which are used in, can be used with nuclear facilities. Yes, using nuclear facility is very dangerous because a small amount of portions of radiological substance can go and have far-reaching effect. That is why these substances and gases are very rare and very dangerous. So radiological substances are another dangerous form of challenge that it may pose if it ever becomes a weapon that is used for terrorism. Then we have nuclear weapon attack. Nuclear weapons is one of the deadliest aspects of terrorism, which can destroy the world within the tip of an eye or the twinkle of an eye. Okay, so it's important to state that there are no terrorist organizations that ever acquire the use of nuclear weapons, but there are possibilities of terrorist group obtaining nuclear weapons. This has been one of the major concerns of global leaders and analysts. This concern has become a great threat to global security in recent times. Okay, now Matthew Bourne and Muslim in 2011 argued that there are strong indications that the likes of Al Qaeda and vigorously seeking to acquire nuclear weapons and plutonium on the highly enriched uranium needed to produce some of the nuclear weapons. In summary of nuclear weapons, one year, United Nations Security Council and United Nations at large are putting sanctions on countries, banning them from being engaged in the production of nuclear weapons, because nuclear weapons in the hand of a terrorist is almost like saying danger and death to all, because nuclear weapons are very dangerous. Not just dangerous, but they can do a lot of damage within a very short time. So nuclear weapons are generally discouraged heavily by law, and it is strongly fought that terrorists do not ever, not just terrorists, even countries that can become terrorist groups, okay, are really fought and sanctioned against having against having nuclear weapons because of the massive effect that nuclear weapons can have in a very short time. So these are the various forms, or if you would, aspects of terrorism or tools that terrorists can use. It can be chemical terrorism, it can be bioterrorism, it can be biological terrorism, it can be nuclear weapons attack. Okay, remaining one, and lastly, cyber terrorism. This is the most defined. This is mostly defined as a sort of any premeditated or motivated attacks against a state actor information system, programs, data, as well as threatens extreme violence or passion or great fear used by non-state actor terrorists and both the state actors and the general. Cyber terrorism is one of the most common attacks by several non-state actors across the globe now, and has been a source of major concern by actors in recent times. Given the fact that terrorist organizations can easily launch and execute an attack from thousands of miles away from the target, which might be extremely difficult to trace. In a related development, Lewis intended to opine that cyber terrorism is used of computer nature as a tool to shut down critical infrastructure such as water, energy, transportation, government operations, and the rest of them. I will give us a classical example of cyber terrorism. For those that watch foreign movies, have you seen a case where this particular people wants, who of course are terrorists, want something done, and they go to maybe the control center, or probably a technological control center where things are managed, and they want to take over. So you see them in a large place, in a probably what we call a control room, where they will switch off lights from there. They will manipulate the traffic, manipulate the CCTV camera, all to their advantage. So they use technology, which is a form of cyber, and control things. We call that exactly what cyber. Cyber terrorism. Use of internet, application of what? Technology, where you have people who are cyber experts, and they come and manipulate things to their advantage, and to achieve their goal, and they seize control. We call that all of that or cyber security. So they can take over the control, they can introduce virus, and they can create problem, and they can write different codes and programs and all completely alter what is done within that system. So we call that cyber terrorism. So based on that, we want to move faster. I want us to look at another subtopic before we wrap it up, because our time is fast spent. So let us look at the psychology of terrorism. Psychology of terrorism. I think the terrorist organization try as much as possible to seek attention through the use of acts of violence, fear, intimidation, and coercion, mostly directed towards unarmed civilians in the same cases, and in some cases, military formations as well as state infrastructure, in order to instill fear and apprehension on the people. The psychology of terrorism is complicated. Terrorists are, in most cases, informed by the concept of cultural belief and influenced by their social groups, so they are as complex as religious, family, political, societal, cultural, and economic systems that shape them. In other words, there are certain guides for the terrorist. There are certain things that sponsors certain actions and makes it thrive. So the psychology of terrorism is complicated. Terrorists are in most cases informed by concepts. They are guided by the concept. They are guided by what they believe. They are influenced by social groups, and they are all a mixture of family, societal, religious, cultural, and economic systems that eventually shape them. So let us look at the basic psychology. Take the part of the terrorists or terrorism or one attitude. Globally, psychologists have not been able to define the concept of terrorist attitude satisfactorily, because there's so much variation among terrorist groups. And this, now, according to Maza, who argues and suggested that desperation and lack of hope produces an attitude of radicalism, always appeal, and for which they are ready to offer a framework to blame, hate, violence, and totalitarian politics. It seems that the attitude of terrorism is a reflection of terrorist ideologies and beliefs that are taught early in life. This explanation is consistent with what Stead says, suggestion that terrorist views are outcome of terrorist indoctrination at an early age about the importance of dedicating their lives to a holy war. So one of the attitudes we see in terrorism is the concept on which they grow up with. From early childhood, indoctrinated, some beliefs are put in them, and they grow with that in them. So the attitude that they grow up with grows along with criminality. According to Sageman in 2004, who argued that only 25% of Al-Qaeda terrorists were involved in petty criminal activities such as forgery, credit, fraud, marijuana dealing, and other petty crimes. While it can rigorously argue that several terrorist organizations, including bandits, were involved in petty crimes such as killing, maiming, raping, and terrorizing organizations to finance their efforts. So we are saying that over time, while some people may believe that criminality growing up may not be a part of it, but in reality, we have actually see it that we actually see in reality that criminality is forms and is also a basis for terrorism as a build-up. Then we see indoctrination, what they grow up with, what they believe, what they have come to see as life, what they have come to see, what they are indoctrinated with, and what is put in them as they grow up. Then we look at personality traits, okay? Low self-esteem, feeling of humiliation, the desire for power, okay? All of these things contribute. Then we have mental illness, when somebody is mentally sick. Yes, when they are mentally sick, they have certain acts to. We even see in the United States people that shoot other people that are mentally deranged, okay? Then we see conformity, their desire to conform to peer pressure, solidarity, to belong to certain groups, and all of that. So we see conformity, we see mental illness, we see personality trait, we see indoctrination, criminality, and attitude in terms of how we grew up. So these are psychology of a terrorist. And with that, we end today's class. So please do read up, and when we meet in our last class, we'll be able to look at probably one or two more topics and wrap it up. Thank you for being a part of today's class. Have a great day.